Yo, I'm about to give you 7 chord progressions that create the craziest vibes. Then I'm going to show you a few easy tricks to make them sound way better. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I got a free gift I think you're really going to like. Let's get it. By the way, I go by Collier. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to start with the serious or determined kind of vibe. Just some general tips for when you're trying to create a serious track. Make sure to add space between your chords just to give listeners time to really feel the emotion in each chord. Very repetitive and simple melodies work well here, and I would suggest using slower tempos, again, just to give listeners time to really feel that vibe. Okay, here's the basic chord progression. Okay, so that was a classic 1-6-3-7 chord progression in G minor. And it sounds pretty good, but we can make it sound better. But first, we got to go over some really important things first. Okay, the top notes and the bass notes in the chord progression are the two guides when it comes to the feel of the chord progression. If these notes go up, then the chord progression has a more positive feel. And if these notes go down, then the chord progression will feel a little bit more negative. Okay, but what happens when your top notes go upward and they have a positive feel, and your bass notes go downward and have a negative feel? Do you have a positive negative chord progression? Well, the answer is yeah, kind of. Okay, let's get back to our serious chord progression to find out. Okay, here's how we'll make this chord progression better. Over here is my G minor scale, so we know what notes sound good. So first, let's add some bass notes. For this example, we can just copy the lowest notes in our chord progression. For the second chord, we'll just add the root note an octave higher. You can add the root note of a chord just about anywhere in your chord progression. The third chord, I'm going to shift the whole chord up an octave higher and then keep my bass note the same. For the fourth chord, we'll shift the C down an octave and we can add an A at a higher octave because we know that the A sounds good in this chord. Now we have this. I'm not gonna lie, that sounds so much better. Here's the before. And here's the after. So does this chord progression sound positive or negative to you? You can see that even though we had top notes and bass notes going in different directions, they still sound really good together. To me, this chord progression doesn't sound positive or negative, but somewhere kind of in the middle. You can create these really complex vibes whenever you switch your top notes and bass notes around. Now, let's hear what this chord progression sounds like in an actual beat. Okay, so on to the dark vibe. Whenever you're creating something dark, you have so many options. You can do spaced out chords or short, choppy chords or anything in between. Mainly stick to the minor scales, but do know that the major scales can get pretty dark too. Simple melodies, call and response melodies, melodies that tell a story, pretty much any melody structure works well with dark chord progressions. You can do slow tempos, you can do fast tempos, it really doesn't matter. Slow tempos make listeners feel haunted or creepy, and faster tempos make listeners feel anxious or trapped. Okay, here's the basic chord progression. Okay, now this is a simple 2-1 chord progression in D minor. Now let's make it better. I'm going to raise this E up an octave and make this G in A sharp an octave down. Next, I'm using this 2-note chord as a passing chord. Now, this is going to help create bounce in my chord progression in 2 ways. The first way this creates bounce is I'm not using a bass note in my second chord, but I am in the first. Whenever you hear these chords back to back, it feels like something's missing. And then the second way it creates bounce is the second chord is half the length of the first chord, which creates a unique rhythm and makes the bounce hit harder. Now I'm going to use my slicer tool to cut another chord at the end of this chord progression just to create a nice smooth transition. Now with this third chord, I'm going to move this F up an octave and this D down an octave. Again, I want to increase that range. Okay, let's hear what we got now. Some people think the only way to achieve a full, rich sound is to layer more notes. And yes, that's one way that you can do it, but you can also use less notes and spread out the range. Here, I'm only using 2 notes over 3 octaves, and the chord still sounds good. Keep in mind, I only used 1 chord for the second half of the melody, but by using different voicings of the chord, I was able to make it sound like 3 different chords. Okay, so let's hear it in a beat. Okay, up next is the dreamy vibe. Now, whenever you're creating something dreamy, you'll definitely want to space your chords out. And if you're making a beat for an artist, try not to use more than 3 chords. Honestly, major or minor scales work well for the dreamy sound. Just make sure to use 7th chords. You could do simple melodies or you can do no melodies at all and let the chords do all the work. Whatever you do, just don't cause the listener to have to think. You can do slow tempos, or if you want, you can get away with a fast tempo. Slower tempos usually have a chill or relaxed, mellow kind of vibe, and faster tempos usually create songs that sound somewhat hypnotizing. Okay, so here's the basic chord progression. Okay, this one isn't too bad. This is a 6-1-5 chord progression in B minor. Now, let's see if we can make it sound better. Okay, on the first chord, I added the 7th and then moved my B up an octave to increase the range. Then on the second chord, I moved the bottom 2 notes up an octave and then added the 7th, which is this A. This created the downward slope that I wanted in my top notes, and I kind of wanted this chord progression to sound a little sad. On the last chord, I added the 7th, which was this E, and then I moved this F sharp up an octave. Then I just copied my bass notes an octave down. Okay, let's take a listen. Okay, that one sounds crazy. Here's the bottom line. If you want to make dreamy vibes, use 7th chords. Okay, let's hear what this chord progression sounds like in a beat. Let's talk about creating an emotional vibe. Okay, to do this, you're definitely going to want to space your chords out to really get people in their feelings. You can use major or minor scales, but again, you'll definitely want to use 7th chords for this one. Chord progressions that trend down work really well for the emotional vibe, and simple melodies tend to work best, but you can kind of get away with call and response or even melodies that tell a story sometimes. And lastly, I would suggest slow tempos for this kind of vibe to really give people time to listen and feel the music. Okay, here's the basic chord progression. In its basic form, this is a 1-7-1-5 chord progression in F minor. Now, let's see if we could tweak it a little bit to make it sound a little bit more emotional. For the first chord, we're going to add the root note of F as a mid note. The second chord, we're going to bring this A sharp down an octave and copy the G down an octave. For the third chord, we'll just add a G sharp at the bottom. The fourth chord, we're going to get rid of the D sharp and then add the 7th and then copy the G down. Now for the bass notes, we're just going to add this classic shape. This note pattern works for any minor scale. All you have to do is start at the tonic, which in this case is an F because we're in F minor, then use the next note down in the scale, and then use the next note down in the scale, and then come back up one. These notes just sound amazing together and make a great start to any emotional chord progression. Now let's hear it in a beat. Look how the body of the chord progression goes up, but most of the bass notes go down. This note at the end here adds a little positivity to all this negativity. That's one reason why this chord progression sounds so good, because of the contrast. Now, how does this chord progression make you feel? Type your answer below in the comments and let me know. Does it make you feel positive things or negative things or neither? Okay, let's talk about creating an epic or cinematic vibe. Now, when you're creating this sound, you'll definitely want to space your chords out, and major or minor scales both work here, but again, you'll definitely want to use seventh chords. You'll want to have thick layered chords for this sound, so bass notes are a must. Simple melodies, call and response melodies, and melodies that tell a quick story all work well here. I would suggest slow tempos just to really drive that cinematic vibe home. Okay, here's the basic chord progression. Okay, this is the basic form of a 1-5-6-7 chord progression in F minor. Now, let's see if we can make it sound better. All right, we're not going to do anything too crazy to this chord progression. For the first chord, we're going to add the root note at the top. Now, I want to give this chord progression a darker vibe because this sounds a little bit happy. So I'm going to take all the other chords and drop them down an octave. For the second chord, I'm going to add the seventh. Okay, for the third chord, I'm going to add the root note an octave higher. And on the fourth chord, I'm going to add the fifth an octave lower. For the bass notes, we can use another classic chord pattern. We will start at the tonic, or F, and go 3 notes in the scale down. Then use the next note up. And then the next note up again. Now we have this. Okay, now let's listen to this chord progression in a beat. Hey, real quick, if you like any of the drums that I'm using in this video, you could get them for free in the Trap Creations bundle, which comes with a ton of other resources, including the prototype drum kit. Link is in the description. Okay, let's talk about creating an inspired vibe. Whenever you're creating an inspired vibe, you can use major or even minor scales, but just make sure that your chords are trending up in your progression. This will help to give your chords that more positive sound. You can use simple melodies, call and response melodies, or melodies that tell a story. They all work well here. You can even use slow tempo or fast tempo. Slow tempos kind of sound more deep and thoughtful, and fast tempos sound more uplifting and energetic. Okay, here's the chord progression. In its basic form, it's a 3-5-1-6 chord progression in an A minor. Now, let's see if we can make it sound a little bit better. Okay, for the first chord, we're going to take our C up an octave. We're not even going to touch the second chord. For the third chord, we're going to shift the C and the A up an octave. And the fourth chord, we're going to add this sixth, which adds a nice little flavor to this chord. For the bass notes, we're going to start with the root note of the first chord. I like the way this G sounds, so we'll use this as our second bass note. To keep the upward trend going, I'm going to add an A, and then to add a little contrast at the end, I'm going to add an F so we aren't just going up the whole time. There's nothing wrong with keeping an upward trend, but I like to mix it up because it sounds better to me. This is what it sounds like. Super dreamy, jazzy 7th, 9th, and 11th chords get all the love, but don't forget to experiment with the 6th chords too. Also, don't be afraid to use the same notes through the chord progression. This can build up a sense of comfort and familiarity with your listener just because they've heard that note a few times already. Okay, here's what this chord progression sounds like in a beat. Lastly, let's talk about a mysterious vibe. Now, with this vibe, you definitely want to space your chord progressions out a little bit and trend your chord progressions up and down with this one. Mainly stick to the minor scales and simple melodies, call and response melodies, and melodies that tell a short story work really well with this sound. You can do fast tempos or you can do slow tempos with this one. Faster tempos sound kind of anxious or scared, and slower tempos really bring out that mysterious sound. Okay, let's take a listen to the basic chord progression. Okay, this is a 1-5-6-5 chord progression in B minor. Now let's make this sound really mysterious. For the first chord, I'll copy the D and the B an octave higher. For the second chord, I'm going to move this C sharp down an octave, and I'm going to use a borrowed chord from the B major scale by making this an F sharp minor. Listen to the flavor this adds. For the third chord, I'm going to move this D down an octave, and the last chord, I'm going to move this C sharp down an octave. For the bass notes, I'm just going to drag down the middle notes for the first three chords, and then the last chord, I'll use the top note because I like the way it sounds. Now we have this. Try using borrowed chords to add a little extra flavor to your music. They're a little bit less predictable and they add a nice, unique sound to your music. Let's see what this sounds like in a beat. Okay, since you stayed with me this long, I got a free gift for you. All the drum loops, MIDI, and samples from this video come from the Vibe sample pack. Everything is 100% royalty free, and all the samples come with stems and MIDI. Link is in the description. Okay, now watch this video next to learn 15 new ways to make better melodies.